My name is Claire Ashworth, and I was 34 the year. Marcus Hale walked through the lobby of my resort and asked the front desk to call the owner. He didn't recognize the woman who answered the phone. He didn't recognize me at all. I stood at the top of the mezzanine stairs in a charcoal blazer, with my name on the building behind me, and watched him smooth his jacket in the reflection of the lobby glass, rehearsing whatever version of himself he'd decided to bring today. He looked good. He always looked good. That was never the problem. The problem 10 years ago was that I had believed good-looking meant trustworthy, that confident meant capable, that a man who ordered wine without looking at the price meant he knew something about money I didn't. He knew how to spend mine. That was the only thing Marcus Hale ever truly understood about finance. I didn't go downstairs, not yet. I told my front desk manager, Elena, to offer him coffee and tell him the owner would be with him shortly. Then I walked back to my office, closed the door, and stood at the window that looks out over Puget Sound, and I gave myself exactly 4 minutes to remember what he took. Not for anger, I was past anger. For clarity, 10 years ago I had $47,000 in a savings account. It was every dollar I had made in 3 years of working double shifts as a hotel operations coordinator at a mid-range property in Belltown. I lived in a studio apartment with a galley kitchen and a window that faced a parking structure. I meal prepped on Sundays. I didn't own a car. I was building something. I knew exactly what I was building toward, even if I couldn't name it yet. Marcus came into my life at an industry mixer in February. He was in commercial real estate, or said he was. He had a firm handshake and an opinion about everything, and a way of listening that made you feel like the smartest person in the room. We were married 11 months later. I should have understood the timeline as a warning. I didn't. Within the first year, the $47,000 was gone. Not stolen, technically. That's what made it difficult to explain to people who asked. He hadn't forged my signature. He had simply made himself indispensable to every financial decision I made, and then guided each one toward his own needs with the quiet confidence of a man who had done it before. The renovation on the condo he owned but I paid for. The investment opportunity he needed bridge capital for. The credit card I co-signed because we were family now, weren't we? Family helps family. By the time I understood what had happened, I was 27, living in my coworker Pamela's spare room, with a legal separation filing I'd paid for with a paycheck advance, and a credit score that took 4 years to rebuild. Marcus left Seattle 3 months after the divorce was finalized. He sent one text, starting fresh. No hard feelings. I didn't respond. I had nothing to say that a lawyer hadn't already said in writing. What I built after that, I built alone. The Ashworth Lodge opened 7 years ago on 42 acres outside Port Townsend, overlooking the water. 12 cabins, a main lodge with a restaurant, a spa that a Seattle magazine called Quietly Extraordinary, and a name above the door that belonged entirely to me. I had one investor, my former colleague Pamela, who gave me $80,000 in a handshake and said, "Pay me back when you can," and I did, with interest, in year 3. Everything else was mine, earned, documented, paid for in full. The 4 minutes were up. I straightened my blazer and walked downstairs to meet my ex-husband. Marcus was sitting in the leather armchair near the fireplace when I came downstairs. He had a coffee he hadn't touched and his phone face down on his knee, which meant he was nervous. Marcus only put his phone face down when he needed someone to think they had his full attention. He stood when he saw me. The recognition took 3 seconds, I counted. First, the polite smile of a man greeting a stranger. Then the slight tilt of the head. Then the color leaving his face in a slow, controlled drain, like water finding a crack. Claire. He said it the way you say a word you've been mispronouncing for years, and have just been corrected on. I crossed the lobby without rushing. Elena was at the front desk pretending to review a reservation. She wasn't reviewing anything. She was watching, the way good staff watch when they sense a situation. I stopped 4 feet from him, professional distance. The distance I used with vendors and contractors, and anyone I hadn't decided to trust yet. Marcus Hale, I kept my voice at room temperature. What brings you to Port Townsend? It wasn't a question, he heard that. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from 10 years ago. He did it when he was recalibrating. When the version of a conversation he'd rehearsed had already stopped working, and he needed a new one. Claire, I had no idea. I mean, I knew someone had built something out here. I read about the lodge in a piece last spring, but I didn't connect the name. I should have, but I didn't. I waited. He sat back down, not because I'd offered, but because his legs seemed to need it. I remained standing. You look well, he said. I am well, I said. What do you need, Marcus? The second time I said his name without a question mark. Something in his posture shifted. The charm recalibrated again, downward this time, towards something that wanted to look like honesty. He told me it took 11 minutes. I know because I was standing near the clock above the fireplace, and I watched it without letting my eyes move enough for him to notice. The short version was this. Marcus had spent the years after Seattle and Portland, then Denver, then Phoenix. A series of ventures, his word, that had moved from commercial real estate into hospitality, consulting into something he described as brand development for emerging properties. Each city a fresh start. Each fresh start apparently funded by someone else's confidence in him. He was now based in Tacoma. He had a partner, not a romantic one, a business partner named Roy, and together they had identified a property on the peninsula, an old fishing lodge on 12 acres that they believed had significant development potential. They had a seller willing to move quickly. They had a vision, his word again. What they didn't have was a credible hospitality operator, willing to attach their name to the project for the purposes of securing a bank loan. That was the ask. He wanted to use my name, the Ashworth Lodge brand. My 7 years of reviews, my relationships, my reputation, attached to his financing application like a co-signature. He dressed it up in language about partnership and aligned incentives, and a percentage of future revenue that he quoted from memory, with the fluency of a man who had practiced it in a bathroom mirror. When he finished, the fire had burned down an inch. I looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, I want to be clear about that. With the specific, practiced calm I had developed over 7 years of running a business where something went wrong every single week. And the only person responsible for fixing it was me. Marcus, I said, do you remember what you left me with? He blinked. Claire, that was a long time ago. I know how long ago it was, do you remember? He looked at the fire, the floor, his untouched coffee. Things were complicated then, he said. I had $47,000, I said. I said it the same way I would read a line item from a budget report. Flat, factual, without performance. I had $47,000 and a credit score of 810 and 3 years of savings and a plan. When you left, I had Pamela's spare room and a paycheck advance and 4 years of rebuilding. He opened his mouth. I held up one hand. I'm not saying it to make you feel something. I'm saying it because you walked into my building and asked to borrow my name. And before I respond to that, I need you to understand that I know exactly what my name is worth. I built it from a number that should have been 0. The lobby was quiet, the fire ticked. Outside, through the tall windows, the water was flat and gray and indifferent. Marcus looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Or maybe I had and I'd misread it 10 years ago as depth. It might have been shame. It was hard to tell with Marcus. He had always been better at performing sincerity than at producing it. I'll think about it, I said. I said it the way you say something when you have already decided, but want the other person to sit in the uncertainty for a while. I walked back to my office. I closed the door. I pulled up the browser on my laptop and typed Roy Greer Tacoma Hospitality, and Marcus Hale Denver, and Marcus Hale Portland, and a few other combinations that a person learns to run when they've been burned once and paid attention to how the fire started. What I found took me 40 minutes to read. It was worse than I expected. And I had expected something. The first result was a court filing, not a criminal record. Nothing that dramatic, a civil suit filed in Multnomah County, Oregon, 3 years ago. A woman named Sandra Okoye, listed as plaintiff, Marcus Hale in a business entity called Cascade Hospitality Partners listed as defendants. The claim was breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation in connection with a proposed hotel development in the Pearl District. The case had settled. The terms were sealed. I wrote her name in my notebook, Sandra Okoye. I kept reading. The second result was a business registration filing from Colorado. Hale Development Group LLC, registered in Denver, dissolved 14 months after formation. The registered agent was Marcus. The stated purpose was hospitality and commercial property development. There was no record of any completed project attached to the entity. The third result was a LinkedIn profile for someone named Roy Greer, Tacoma-based, as Marcus had said. His experience section listed 7 positions in 11 years across 4 states. Each role lasted between 8 and 18 months. The titles escalated, junior associate to director to principal to managing partner. But the companies beneath the titles were all small, most of them dissolved or inactive when I searched them individually. Roy Greer had never built anything that was still standing. I kept a notepad beside my laptop when I worked. Yellow legal pad, blue pen, the same system I'd used since my days as an operations coordinator in Belltown. I wrote 2 columns, left column what Marcus had told me. Right column, what the public record said. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, the right column was longer. He had told me the fishing lodge was an identified opportunity with a motivated seller. The county assessor's records showed the property had been listed, delisted, and relisted 3 times in 4 years. The current asking price had dropped 22% from the original listing. The seller wasn't motivated, the seller was exhausted. He had told me the bank loan was essentially approved pending operator credibility. I knew enough about commercial lending to know that phrase meant nothing. Essentially approved was the hospitality equivalent of "I'll call you." It was what loan officers said when the application had potential. But the fundamentals weren't there. He had told me his vision for the property was a boutique wilderness retreat, targeting the Pacific Northwest outdoor tourism market. The same market the Ashworth Lodge had spent 7 years carefully building relationships in. He hadn't said that part out loud, but I heard it underneath everything he'd said. He didn't just want my name, he wanted my market. My decade of credibility transferred to a project I had nothing to do with building. I found Sandra Okoye on a professional network. She was a hospitality developer based in Portland. Her profile was careful and precise. The profile of someone who had learned to document everything. I sent her a connection request with a brief note. "My name is Claire Ashworth. I own the Ashworth Lodge in Port Townsend. I believe we may have a mutual acquaintance. I'd value a brief conversation if you're open to it." She accepted within the hour. She called 20 minutes after that. She didn't ask how I knew Marcus. She said he came to you with a property on the peninsula. It wasn't a question. I sat forward. "How did you know that?" "Because he came to me with a property in the gorge 2 years ago. Same structure. He needed an established operator to attach to a financing application." She paused. I said yes, that was my mistake. She told me what happened in the 11 minutes that followed, and I wrote every word in the right column of my notepad, without interrupting her once. Marcus and Roy had used her name and her firm's reputation to secure a preliminary letter of interest from a regional lender. Not a full loan commitment, a letter of interest, which sounds official and means almost nothing, but which they had then presented to the property seller as evidence of funded backing. The seller had taken the property off the market and entered exclusive negotiations. During that exclusivity window, Marcus and Roy had approached 3 separate investors for capital, representing themselves as the lead operators on a project that had credible hospitality backing and lender support. They raised $340,000. The project collapsed when the lender declined to proceed to full underwriting. Marcus and Roy cited market conditions. The investors lost their capital. Sandra lost 18 months of professional reputation repair. The civil suit had settled for an amount she described only as insufficient. I asked her one question when she finished. Did they ever actually intend to develop the property? A long pause. "I think Roy might have in the beginning." She chose her words carefully. Marcus intended to raise money against the idea of a property. The property was a vehicle. It was never the destination. I thanked her. I told her what I was going to do. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I wrote down and underlined twice. "Don't just protect yourself, Claire. Make sure it's documented, everything. Dates, conversations, what he asked for, exactly how he framed it. Because the way Marcus works, if anything goes wrong, the paper trail becomes the only thing that matters." I hung up and looked at my notepad. Then I opened my laptop again and pulled up a blank document. I typed the date at the top. I typed the time Marcus had arrived. I typed every word of his 11-minute ask from memory, in sequence as accurately as I could reconstruct it. I was precise. I had always been precise. It was the thing Marcus had once called my least attractive quality and the thing that had saved me every time he wasn't in the room. When I finished the document, I saved it, emailed it to myself, and picked up the phone. Not to call Marcus, to call my attorney. Her name was Patricia Wren. She had handled the Ashworth Lodge Incorporation, 3 contractor disputes, and a zoning appeal that had taken 14 months and 2 hearings to resolve. She answered on the second ring. "Patricia," I said, "I have a situation. I need 20 minutes, and I need you to tell me exactly what it means to lend someone your professional name for a financing application." "Tell me everything," she said. I did. Patricia called me back the next morning at 7:15. I was already in my office. I had been there since 5:30, reviewing the document I'd written the night before, checking it against my notepad, making sure every word Marcus had said was recorded exactly as he'd said it. Patricia had spent the night doing what Patricia did. She had pulled the business registration for the entity Marcus and Roy had formed. She had reviewed the public filings on the fishing lodge property. She had contacted a colleague in Tacoma who did commercial lending work and asked a few quiet questions about what it meant to attach an established operator's name to a speculative financing application. What she told me confirmed everything Sandra Okoye had described and added 3 details I hadn't known. First, the entity Marcus and Roy had formed, Peninsula Ventures LLC, had been registered only 6 weeks ago. It had no assets, no operating history, and no completed projects. It existed on paper and nowhere else. Second, the fishing lodge property had a lien attached to it from a contractor dispute that hadn't been resolved. Any buyer would inherit the lien unless it was cleared prior to closing. Marcus hadn't mentioned that. Third, the bank Marcus had referenced, the one that had essentially approved the loan pending operator credibility, had declined to comment when Patricia's colleague reached out. Which meant either there was no bank, or there was a bank that had already said no, and Marcus was shopping for a way to reframe the answer. Claire, Patricia said, if you attach your name to this application, you're not endorsing a project. You're endorsing Marcus Hazel. And if the project fails, if investors lose money, if the lender pursues remedies, your name is on the paper. Your reputation becomes the collateral they collect. I know, I said, so what do you want to do? I want to meet with him again, I said, here, tomorrow. And I want you on a call I can conference in if I need to. You're not going to say yes, no. But I'm not going to say no in a way he can reframe later. I'm going to say no in a way that's documented, specific, and impossible to misrepresent. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Good, she said, I'll clear my afternoon. Marcus arrived at 2 the next day. He had dressed better this time. A sport coat I didn't recognize, a tie that matched the blue of the water outside. He had brought flowers, a bouquet of white lilies wrapped in brown paper, the kind of gesture that looked thoughtful and meant nothing. Elena accepted them at the front desk without expression. She put them in a vase, in the staff kitchen, where I would never have to see them. I met Marcus in the small conference room behind the lobby. It had a round table, 4 chairs, and a window that looked out over the dock. I had chosen the room deliberately. It was where I met with contractors and vendors and anyone I intended to negotiate with from a position of documented authority. I had a folder on the table in front of me. He noticed it. He sat down. He smiled. He had recalibrated again overnight. This version of Marcus was humble, apologetic, strategically vulnerable. A man who had made mistakes and learned from them. A man who just needed one more chance. Claire, he said, I want to start by saying I know I don't deserve your help. I know what happened between us was my fault, and I've spent a long time thinking about the ways I let you down. He paused. He was waiting for me to soften. I didn't. Go on, I said. This project is different. Roy and I have put together something real. The property has potential. The market is there. And all we need is someone with your credibility to help us get across the finish line. He leaned forward. I'm not asking you to invest. I'm not asking you to take any risk. I'm just asking you to let us use your name on the application. A letter of support, that's all. I opened the folder. Inside were 6 pages. The first was my timestamp document from 3 nights ago. Every word of his original ask reconstructed from memory. The second was the business registration for Peninsula Ventures LLC showing the 6-week formation date. The third was the county assessor's record showing the property's lien. The fourth was the listing history showing the 3 failed sales attempts. The fifth was a printed summary of the Sandra Okoye lawsuit, including the case number and settlement notation. The sixth was a letter I had drafted that morning. 1 page, 3 paragraphs. I slid the folder across the table. Marcus looked at the first page. His expression didn't change. He turned to the second page. His jaw tightened. By the 4th page, his hand had stopped moving. He was staring at Sandra Okoye's name. I spoke before he could. Marcus, I'm not going to attach my name to Peninsula Ventures. I'm not going to provide a letter of support. I'm not going to introduce you to anyone in my network, recommend you to any lender, or participate in any project you are associated with. He looked up. Claire, I held up one hand, the same hand I'd held up 2 days ago. I'm also not going to report you to anyone. I'm not going to contact the investors Roy is probably already approaching. I'm not going to call Sandra Okoye back and help her build a pattern of conduct case, although I could. I'm not going to do any of those things, because doing them would require me to spend more time on you, and I have spent enough. I pointed to the 6th page. That is a letter confirming that you approached me, that I declined, and that no business relationship exists between the Ashworth Lodge and any entity you are associated with. It's dated today. I have a signed copy in my files. If my name appears on any document connected to you, I will treat it as fraud and respond accordingly. Marcus closed the folder. He sat back. For a moment the performance dropped. I saw something underneath it. Not shame, not regret. Calculation. He was running the numbers. He was figuring out whether there was any angle left. There wasn't. You've changed, he said finally. No, I said. I just stopped being the person you could confuse. I stood up. Elena will validate your parking. The lobby is to your left. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and walked out without another word. I watched him cross the lobby. I watched him push through the glass doors and step into the gray afternoon light. I watched him get into a car that was newer than it should have been if his story were true, and pull out of the gravel lot and disappear around the bend toward the main road. Then I went back to my office. I sat at my desk. I looked out at the water. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished, which was better. At 11:06 a.m., 10 minutes after Marcus and Roy left the library room, I sent an email to Peninsula First Bank's commercial lending department. Subject line: collateral clarification, Greer Holding LLC proposed hospitality refinance, no drama. No accusations, just attachments. Patricia Wren had told me the only thing that matters to a lender is paper. So I sent paper, the recorded deed showing Roy's Holding LLC already owned the fishing lodge, the UCC1 financing statement listing brand-related rights as collateral, and Patricia's one-page notice stating the Ashworth Lodge would not authorize any use of its name, materials, or operations for any financing package. I didn't add commentary beyond 3 sentences. I was contacted by Marcus Hale seeking to use my resort's name as operator credibility. I am not participating and do not consent to any representation implying otherwise. These attached filings may be relevant to your underwriting and title review. Then I stopped. I didn't follow up, I didn't call, I didn't chase. If the deal was clean, my email would be a footnote. If it wasn't, it would be a match near dry grass. At 3:42, Elena knocked on my office door. They're back, she said. Not in the lobby, outside by the parking lot. I walked out to the gravel edge near the cedar fence line. Marcus was there alone this time, hands shoved in his coat pockets like a man trying to hold himself together. Roy's SUV idled behind him. You went to the bank, Marcus said. I went to the truth, I said. His face tightened. You don't get it, that loan was the only way. Roy's private lender is calling the note. If the refinance dies, they take the property. They take everything. I listened. I believed he was scared. I also believed he had earned it. He took a step closer. Claire, please, just write a letter. Just say you'll consult. They won't even verify. It's a box checked. I shook my head once. That's why it's fraud. His eyes flashed. Still punishing me. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm refusing to pay for you. For a moment, he looked like he might say something cruel. Then his shoulders dropped. The voice changed. I don't have anyone else, he said. I held the silence long enough for him to feel it. Then I said the only help I could live with. I'll give you one name, a bankruptcy attorney in Tacoma. That's it, not my brand, not my business. Not my signature. His mouth opened then closed. He nodded once like the air had left him. I texted him the contact. He didn't say thank you, he didn't say goodbye. He just got in the SUV and left. 2 weeks later, I got the update from Patricia. Peninsula First halted underwriting pending additional disclosures. Roy's lender filed suit, the refinance collapsed. And my lodge stayed mine, clean, quiet, and untouchable. 10 years ago, Marcus left me broke in Seattle. This time, he left my resort with nothing he could take. That's the difference between love and access.